What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In the video for the First Descendant today, we're looking at Luna and a setup that I have for her as we are about to start season 3 at the beginning of August. Now, arguably this is the best time ever to build Luna now, as she is one of the better non-attribute mobbers in the game, and since season 3's new activity will focus around elemental resistances, non-attribute is a great choice as a damage type for you to use for a Descendant, especially if this Descendant is really good at mobbing. And as I've mentioned, this build with Luna is actually really good at chewing through massive amounts of enemies super fast. I've basically been using this for like the last week to level up weapons and things like that as I do, you know, Sigma and 400% infiltration dungeons and stuff. And the way that this is just able to fluidly glide through the map and everything like that without ever having to essentially stop is kind of like really awesome and yeah, pretty damn cool. The only real complaint I would have per se for the build is the fact that you kind of like get so zoned into looking at the bar with the notes on and everything like that, that you tend to sometimes collide with, you know, stuff as you're moving around because your concentration is spent on actually making sure that you don't hit any, don't miss any notes, instead of actually, you know, looking where you're running and so on. That being said, we've all done Sigma dungeon till it comes out of our fucking eyeballs, as well as 400% infiltration dungeons. So we kind of like know the layout of these dungeons like the back of our hands by now, and kind of like you should be able to run these from muscle memory if you've been playing more than a couple of weeks. I personally think non-attribute Descendants are going to be seeing a lot more play come the new activity. I do also at the same time want to say that I don't think it's going to be that difficult that the only Descendants that are going to be viable are non-attribute Descendants. That's not what I'm saying at all. The game hasn't been that difficult for a super long time, and I still think we'll be able to just force our way through with elemental damage types. But Luna is an exceptionally good option for you if you, for example, are not a Bunny fan or are not an Innes fan or anything like that, and you maybe even just feel like playing something new instead of playing those, let's call them like fan favorites like Freyna, Innes, and of course Bunny. So getting us into the build itself, let's go ahead and look at the Descendant modules first. Now, by default, Luna is actually a support character, and she is exceptionally good at actually basically buffing up the damage of your allies that are with you. However, if you are playing solo, or if you want to play a, let's say, mobbing version of hers, then you are going to have to use one of her Transcendent mods called Noise Surge. In this case, what you do is you change all of your abilities essentially into damage dealing AoE abilities. So they lose all of that utility and buffing potential that they generally have, and they instead become just big AoE nukes. So once we slap Noise Surge in, you'll see that all of her abilities are then essentially changed. Now you'll see her damage type is non-attribute, and then it makes all three of these abilities here singular. Now essentially how this plays then is basically all you're doing is you're playing each one of the 3 notes until you get the buff, which means you play it until she gets that animation where she essentially dances on the disc. And then because we're trying to build in some duration into this build as well, it helps then that you have some of these buffs essentially overlaying each other. And what are these buffs? The second ability, if you get up to the point where you essentially have disturbing noise with enough stacks on it, then you will get a buff to your skill critical hit rate. Okay, and with this setup you can actually cap out, so you'll be at 100% skill critical hit rate, which means you'll be dealing a dickload of damage. Her second ability, when you essentially get enough stacks of this in, then you will increase her skill critical hit damage. And then her fourth one will actually increase her skill power modifier increase. Now, there is a small window where if you do all 3 of them in a row, you do the second ability first until you get the buff, then this third ability, and then the fourth ability, that you have about 2 to 3 seconds that you essentially overlay your damage and you have all 3 of these buffs active, which is really nice and does deal a lot of damage. But the damage is strong enough with this build that, generally speaking, and maybe you saw that in the clips that we're playing in the background, that I essentially just alternate between these 2. So I stack up my second ability, so now I'm maxed out on crit, then I stack up my damage, and then by the time that is done, then I go back to crit, and then damage, crit, and then damage, and basically rinse repeat. That means that you're dealing massive hits all the time, and essentially you 2 to 3 to 4 hit yellow bar enemies, the bosses at the end, and you essentially definitely one tap everything that is, you know, running around you. So There again, there's some experimentation, like I said, that you can do there. You kind of like have to get used to it. The build is very punishing if you miss notes, so that'll be the first thing that you kind of like have to get used to. If you've ever played any kind of like rhythm based game or something like that, then it shouldn't be that big a deal. But the point is, they've also made this system easier in the game, so it's not as difficult to pull off as it used to be. But that being said, this is going to be your biggest hurdle, and if you constantly miss notes, then of course the build is not going to be nearly as sexy as it should be. All right, so that being said, when we slap in noise surge, the Transcendent mod, now we need to start building it out. Now, by default, Luna has decent crit stats, all right? So she has skill critical hit rate of, and this is obviously, she starts out at 15%, so I'm at 19.8, and that's because of, you know, things like my Arche Tuning and so on. She starts out with a flat 15% rate, which is really good, and that means that she's a viable Descendant to actually build into crit. So that's absolutely what we're going to do. So to do that, there's actually 4 mods that we can go for. The first is 2 blue mods, Skill Insight and Skill Concentration. So let's grab those 2 quickly. They're going to be near the bottom here. 1 second. Skill Insight and Skill Concentration. There we go. So both of these actually help us out with skill critical hit rate as well as skill critical hit damage. Now there's also 2 purple mods that do the same thing. Emergency Measures, giving us skill critical hit rate and a small amount of skill critical hit damage. And then likewise, we also have another purple mod called Frontlines, which is going to give us skill critical hit damage as a bigger chunk, and then a small amount of skill critical hit rate. Now, with these 4 mods in place, we sufficiently boost our skill crit and our skill crit damage to actually have quite a profound effect on our damage. So now we can see we're sitting at 50, almost 51% skill critical hit rate and a 4 times multiplier on our skill critical hit damage, which is super, super awesome. So then what we're going to do is we're going to now start fleshing out some other things that will help us with her damage profile, as well as just making the damage deal, you know, over a bigger radius. Now, 2 things which are important for Luna is the radius. In other words, we want to have our range increase. So those pulses where we fire off damage, we want those to be as big as possible. And the next thing we also want is we want to increase our duration, because what our duration is going to do is it's going to increase the duration of how long you can keep that skill critical hit rate and that skill critical hit damage, as well as the additional damage from the 4th ability, how long you can keep that buff up. So you can see here it says, for example, disturbing noise, and all 3 of these are the same, right? So you'll see the buff disturbing noise, the duration is 11.1 seconds off of a standard 10-second duration. So we want to increase that duration as well. So one of the easiest ways to do that is through a blue mod called Skill Extension. When we put Skill Extension in, then we're going to go from 10 seconds to 14.7 seconds. Now, likewise, there's a blue mod that can also help us with our range problem. So we also want to put in Skill Expansion. So now we've added to our duration as well as our range. Another good mod for us here that will help us out a little bit with range as well, and kind of like range cap us, is Amplification Control. This gives us skill effect range of 51.7%, and then it also gives us a little bit of max shield, but that's not really the reason why we take it. Now, once we've slapped all of this in, and alongside what we're going to pick in the Arche Tuning board and everything like that, we are actually range capped for the normal damage, right? When you have the enhanced damage, I mean, both of them are radius 18 meters, but the point is then you are basically pulsing out your damage as far as you can. And with this combination, it means that when you walk into a room, in most cases, you're essentially covering the room from corner to corner, and that's kind of like what you want. Otherwise, you're doing way too much sort of like circling around in the room to make sure that your damage overlaps the enemies as they spawn. Keep jumping out, god damn it. All right, so that leaves 3 more slots available for us, and these 3 slots we can use to just amplify our damage through the roof. Now, something interesting about Luna is that cooldown is not a useful stat for her at all, right? Her notes, they're off use, right? So they have a cooldown of 0. Unless, of course, you miss a note, then you have a cooldown of 10 seconds. Likewise, her pistol, which you have to take out to start playing the fucking note matching game, also has a cooldown of 2 seconds. So you can't really make it much less, and you can also not damage it too much. So a good thing to do with her is actually there's 2 purple mods that we can use that actually blow your cooldown through the fucking roof, but they give you a huge amount of additional power. One is called Maximize Skill. What this does is it gives us skill power plus 87.6%, but it also increases our cooldowns by 50%. But again, our cooldowns are all 0, so that doesn't really matter for us. The other one is maximize power, which gives us skill power modifier of 96.1%, but also again increases our skill cooldowns by 50. So now when you slap these in, you'll see that your gun, your pistol's cooldown goes from 2 seconds to 4 seconds. Big fucking whoop, because you're going to have this out the whole time in any case, so who cares? But your notes are not affected. Their cooldown is still 0 seconds. So as long as you don't miss notes, you're good. If you miss a note, however, now instead of waiting 10 seconds for that note to come back, you have to wait 20 seconds. So don't miss those fucking notes. And then last but not least, there's another mod that we can take that also gives us a little bit of additional damage, and that is non-attribute syncytium. All right. Now this gives us critical hit resistance, which doesn't matter, but it also gives us non-attribute skill power of 10.2%, which is really, really good. We aren't running any survivability mods on this, like HP or anything like that, because of course we get those from our external components where we can now mod or like basically HP and defense onto, so we should be fine. Speaking of reactors and external components, let's quickly have a look at that. So of course the reactor of choice for us is materialized singularity reactor, because we want non-attribute and we want singular, because those are her damage types, right? Non-attribute, singular, so that's what we want. In terms of the substats that you want on there, you are probably going to be wanting skill effect range and skill duration up, because both of those are super valuable for us, and that helps us to cap our range essentially, and also get our duration up to about 15 seconds, which is really good off the original 10 seconds. Yes, you can go for more damage here. You can go for more non-attribute damage or something like that, but I do tend to feel that this build deals enough damage, and I'm sure you've seen that already from the footage, that it's really more about kind of like affecting the other stats which are also important for us, like range and duration. So those I found more valuable than actually upping the damage at this point. What is important, however, is that you should probably think about using a weapon that's optimized to your reactor. Yes, it's fine if you go with 100% damage off a non-optimized reactor, and in that case you'll still one-tap the trash, but you know, tougher enemies will maybe take like 2 or 3 more nodes to kill, which I have been doing to level weapons or so, but you're really going to see some insane damage numbers once you match up your reactor, like in this case hand cannon. I'm walking around with the malevolent, because then you're going to get that additional 160% damage, and it's just going to fucking flatten health bars all over the place. In terms of your external components, you want to be using Enlightened Mage, because this set is essentially perfect for non-attribute descendants. Basically what this does is add a 2 set bonus, it gives you skill power of plus 6%, and add a 4 set bonus. Whenever you use a non-attribute skill, it grants you 1 stack of truth. When you have 3 stacks of truth, then you're going to get non-attribute skill power plus 84%. Now, by the way, every node counts as an activation of a skill, so you are going to have this buff up almost the entire fucking time, because every 3rd node that you hit, you will have your 3 stacks, and then essentially truth activates, and boom, you've got your damage. So this is a really, really powerful set for us to use. Yes, you could use something like Slayer, that's also okay, I guess, but this is really going to elevate your damage profile, and it's absolutely a set that's worth chasing down, especially for this. In terms of your mods on here, as mentioned, you want max HP and defense. You'll see that I have that on all 4 my pieces. And then in terms of your substats on each external component, of course, as usual for any kind of skill-based descendant, you want MP recovery out of combat and max HP on your cigar. On your sensor, which is arguably the most important piece out of the 4 set, you want max MP and you want MP recovery in combat. And then under your memory, you want defense and MP recovery modifier. And last but not least, under your processor, you want max shield and shield recovery modifier, or max shield and toxin resistance. Any one of those is fine. Kind of like the processor, doesn't really matter. It's pretty much like a fucking non-point. So yeah. Then weapons. Basically, weapons don't matter at all, right, in this setup. And that's why I've said I've been using her to essentially level up weapons and stuff like that. Because your weapons aren't really a thing. You can basically, you know, kind of like carry anything in your hands as long as it's matched to your reactor, and you should be good to go. Second last thing that we can look at is the Arche Tuning board. Shit, I gotta move my fucking head over here again. All right, so here I would say this is could be almost like a standard setup for a skill-based descendant. However, we are not chasing down the skill cooldown node over here, because as mentioned, skill cooldown is poopies for her. So what we are doing is we're coming across here, we're getting as much skill power as we can. We get ourselves some skill cost reduction here, which doesn't really play that big a role, but okay, cool. We want the range nodes here, we want the additional skill power here, then we shoot all the way up here, more skill power, and we go over here and we get ourselves our mutant cell, which is non-attribute cohesion, which is going to just give us another big boost to our damage as well once we get those stacks going. Now, because we built her for crit, it makes sense for us to dip this way and grab ourselves this skill critical hit rate node as well as this skill critical hit damage node. These are very, very good and absolutely going to help us out a lot with our damage. Now, what you can do, all right, is, for example, you can potentially swap out the skill critical hit rate here, which is going to be about 4% or something like that overall in terms of like your skill crit. And you could rather go for skill duration, which gives you about 0.5 seconds additional duration. It really depends on kind of like what your preference is. I tested both and the effect was kind of like in a way negligible. I rather want more skill critical hit rate than I want that 0.5 seconds duration. So I opted for this way, but just wanted to mention that it's perfectly viable if you want to rather pick up the duration, because maybe you don't have the duration on your fucking reactor, for example, or something like that. Then of course that's also something that you can do. The last thing that we can look at is our inversion reinforcements, which are also kind of like sort of like a thing, right? So in terms of our inversion reinforcements, what we want is we want to be picking up adrenaline rush, so we get that additional movement speed, which is nice. We can zip around faster. Faster means faster clears when we're trying to do mobbing content, but it's also because we want quantum domain. Quantum domain essentially gives us more range and more skill power, and you know, this is just going to elevate our damage profile even a little bit more, and in cases where you aren't range capped, this is going to get you even closer to that cap, if not on it. Then biodensity augmentation is always good in terms of survivability because it gives us the max HP here. And then last but not least, this one over here is kind of, I had it selected because I wanted to show you the skill cooldown node here is redundant. So a lot of people always have this one active. They always have this one here. But in the case of this build, you kind of like want to make sure that you don't pick this and rather get yourself something like you could go for, you know, additional HP and recovery orbs, which give you more HP and MP, even though this build doesn't suffer from any of that. Or you can just maybe take, you know, something, if you're struggling with survivability or something like that, you can pick up anything. But your third choice here is really like up to you. Think about which one of these mods you want here at the end. But the two important ones to pick, which will help out a lot, is Adrenaline Rush, which gets us basically Quantum Domain, and then of course Biodensity Augmentation, which gets us a little bit of survivability. So your third choice is really entirely yours, so go ahead, have at it. And that's going to be it for the build. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know if you have been dabbling with Luna and what your thoughts are. I was pleasantly surprised. It's one of the Descendants that I've waited the longest to actually develop into a damage dealing Descendant. And I was pretty damn impressed by the numbers that she was able to push out. And I think that that's going to continue on into Season 3. And I think she's going to be really, really good on the Axion, is it Axion Plains, Axion fucking whatever, the new area in Season 3. So looking forward to trying her out. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know how you set up your Luna. And of course, keep watching. I'll see you next video. As always, fucking cheers.